Good morning, good people.
Hold on, I got to turn up your volume and get the mic set up.
And I'll close my blinds.
That does not bend as much as I thought it would. Can you give me a test there?
Hello. Can you hear me?
We're good.
Good. Good morning, everyone. Father Jay, I'm just going to fill up my glass of water. I'll be back in 10.
Well, everything was set up. I'm just trying to get us live here on Facebook.
No problem. Take your time.
We're going to redo this here. So I gave a much more detailed introduction of you this week or this time. So
okay.
Here in
before I arrived.
Yeah.
No problem. Thank you for being patient with me.
They know much more about you than the other two parishes did. So.
Okay. Is it warm enough in Manitoba that you need the fans going?
Not quite, but they're always running, so.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay. All right, I think we are live. So
wonderful. Hello, everyone on Facebook.
Hey, everyone can see we're all good. And Father Deacon, you can see us.
I can see you. I can hear you.
Excellent. All right. Well, introduction has already been done, so take it away.
Okay. Thank you, Father Jay, and thank you all for your patience. I don't know how long you've been waiting. I'm hopefully not too long. One of the funny things about technology is that sometimes we have to wait more. So over the last few days, I've been leading your district community through 3 passages from the Gospel of Mark, 3 miracles that Jesus works that show us both the radical grace of God, how God always takes the initiative in reaching out to us when we are stuck in sin, when we are trapped in this fallen world. God reaches out to us in love. He doesn't wait for us to show him that we're worthy. He doesn't wait for us to tally up a certain number of good deeds. Even while we are stuck in our sin, he takes the initiative in his great love and mercy to save us. And on Friday night, we talked about the miracle where Jesus heals a man who has a legion of demons in him, and he sends the demons into the deep, in the pigs. And then last night, we talked about the miracle where Jesus heals a woman who has a hemorrhage. She's been suffering for 12 years, and Jesus heals her as she reaches out and touches him in faith. And then he validates her faith. He calls everyone to see what her faith has done for her in reaching out to the grace of God. And today, I want to conclude by looking at the gospel that sort of sandwiches yesterday's gospel. I didn't talk about this yesterday, but Jesus heals the woman with the hemorrhage while he's on his way to heal someone else. He's interrupted, actually, by the woman with the hemorrhage while he's going to work a different miracle. So let's read that today. This is from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 5. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and he was beside the sea. Then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet and besought him, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live." And he went with him. And a great crowd followed him and thronged about him. And then we have the gospel of the woman with the hemorrhage of blood. It begins, "And there was a woman who had a flow of blood for 12 years. And for 10 more verses, we talk about the woman with the flow of blood. And it ends this way. Jesus said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While Jesus was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house someone who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But ignoring what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." And he allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. When they came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, he saw a tumult and people weeping and wailing loudly. And when he had entered, he said to them, "Why do you make a tumult and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. But he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. Taking her by the hand, he said to her, "Talitha kumi," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." And immediately the girl got up and walked. She was 12 years of age, and they were immediately overcome with amazement. And he strictly charged them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. So just like the last few days, today I want to move in 3 stages. I've been looking at the problem that the gospel presents to us, and then the solution to this human problem, the divine solution, the solution of God's grace. And then lastly, I want to look at what this means for us, how God is speaking to us, to the problems of our life and the solution that he is offering. So let's look at the problem first. So there's this man, his name is Jairus, and his daughter is sick. And not only is she sick, she's actually on her deathbed. She's close to dying. And he calls her his little daughter. So until we get to the end of the passage, we might think that, she's 3 years old or 5 years old, still small enough that she'd come and sit on his lap while he's having dinner. But at the end, we find out she's 12. But that shows actually how close he is to her, how much his heart is breaking that his daughter, who he loves so dearly that he calls her his little daughter, is dying. So he comes to Jesus. Now, why does he come to Jesus? His resources, his power are not enough to save his daughter. Who knows? Maybe he's gone to doctors. They haven't been able to help. He's a ruler of the synagogue. He's a religious man. But something about his faith is lacking, at least in the sense that despite being an expert in the law, perhaps, he can't save his daughter. He needs something outside of himself. His own resources are inadequate. So he comes to Jesus. He asks Jesus to come to his house, and Jesus agrees, but then what intervenes? A crowd. There's a crowd that's thronging around Jesus. So you can imagine Jairus thinking, people, get out of the way. My daughter is on her deathbed, and all these people are in the way, or they're, who knows, they're maybe asking Jesus questions, or they just want to reach out and touch him because he's sort of a celebrity. And this crowd is an obstacle to Jesus getting to Jairus' daughter. It's slowing him down. And then things come to a halt with the woman with the hemorrhage. And I didn't read the gospel, but you know how it goes. You've heard it in Sundays, that the woman reaches out and touches Jesus. And then Jesus stops and says, who touched me? And the disciples say, well, come on, Master, the crowd is filled with people. But Jesus wants the woman to come forth so that her faith can be recognized, so that her faith can be an example for other people. But we imagine what's going on in Jairus' head while this is happening. He is probably losing his mind. He's probably at his wit's end because his daughter is close to death. And Jesus is talking to this woman. First, he's debating with his disciples, and then he's talking to this woman about her faith. So Jairus is almost certainly at the point of panic now. Just as Jesus finishes talking to the woman, what happens? Someone from Jairus' house comes and says, maybe within earshot of Jesus, or perhaps for the whole group to hear, he says, your daughter is dead, ruler. Why bother the teacher any longer? Which is sort of a polite way of saying, it's time to give up. There's no more hope. So things really could not get worse for Jairus at this point. Somebody has told him, give up, man. Your daughter is dead. It's time to move on. And then the hopelessness of the situation is reinforced when they finally get to the house, when people are crying and they're weeping. So Jairus sees that everyone now believes his daughter is dead. And he says, or when Jesus says, rather, don't worry, she's sleeping, everyone laughs at Jesus. They move from mourning to cynical laughter. What's wrong? Who does this guy think he is? He must be crazy that this girl is sleeping. We know, we saw her take her last breath. We can feel her body getting cold. So the problem that this gospel presents for Jairus and for us is one of real desperation, one of real hopelessness. So where is the solution here? To begin with, Jairus has enough faith. He has enough sense of the inadequacy of his own resources, but that there might be someone who has enough resources. There might be someone who has enough power and love that he goes in search of Jesus. So Jairus is willing to go in search of Jesus, and Jesus is willing to go with Jairus. Now, I presented the interruption of the woman with the hemorrhage as increasing Jairus' anxiety, as increasing the urgency and the fear. But it also is intended to increase Jairus' faith. That's partly why Jesus stops the woman, not just for the sake of the crowds. Yesterday, I talked about the crowds reaching out and touching Jesus without faith versus the woman touching him with faith. Jesus wants Jairus also to see the woman's faith. And when the messengers come to Jairus and they say, your daughter is dead, why trouble the teacher any longer? Jesus overhears them and he interrupts and says, do not fear, only believe. Have faith like the woman you just saw. You just saw a woman come out of the crowd and testify that she's been healed of an illness that she had for 12 years. Now think about your daughter who's 12 years old and the faith that you need to have in imitation of this woman. Her faith has led to her healing or her salvation. Your faith may lead to your healing, your salvation, your daughter's salvation. Now then, at this point, Jesus gets rid of the crowd. Before the people are thronging around him, and then he says, only Peter, James, and John can come with me. Only my most intimate disciples. And he goes with Jairus to the house. And then when Jesus arrives at the house, well, Jairus is probably struck a heavy blow by what he sees. He sees the people in his household and his relatives are now weeping. Jesus is not bothered by this. Jesus says, she is sleeping. She's not dead. And when the people laugh at him, he's not bothered by that. He just tells them, okay, get out, get out. You can go to the courtyard. You can go to the backyard. It's time for me to do my work. When Jesus says she's sleeping, what does he mean? Now, one possibility is that he means literally she's sleeping and that everybody is mistaken. That, you know, she's sleeping so deeply that it looks like she's dead, perhaps. But that's sort of unrealistic, that, you know, a crowded house of people would all mistake a sleeping person for a dead person. It seems to me that what Jesus means is that as far as he is concerned, she is sleeping. From Jesus's point of view, her death is no more of an obstacle than her sleeping. Jesus can rise people from the dead. He can raise people from the dead just as easily as you and I could shake our husband or wife in bed and say, hey, come on, wake up, your alarm's going off. Jesus puts the skeptics out, and then he takes this girl by the hand and he says, Talitha kum. He's speaking to her in her own language. We might mistake this for magic, that Jesus is saying sort of like hocus pocus, or, you know, if you like Harry Potter, that Jesus is using some sort of spell the way that the kids at Hogwarts use spells to in other languages. He's using some sort of magic words that have some secret meaning. Jesus is not using magic here. He's speaking to the girl in Aramaic. He's speaking to her in actually a language that's some people still speak in the Middle East, that Jesus would have spoke growing up. When Mary sang lullabies to Jesus, she would have sung them in Aramaic. And this little girl heard her parents, she learned to speak on her parents' knee, speaking Aramaic. So Jesus is speaking to her in a language she understands, in words that she knows, the language that she first learned to say, I love you in. So we have this problem that the power of death is creeping quickly into Jairus's life, into his house, and it risks wreaking havoc. It risks basically tearing this man's heart apart, perhaps tearing apart his relationship with his wife, his other children. And then God intervenes. God intervenes, challenging Jairus to faith, and then defeating death just as easily as he would defeat sleep. So what does this mean for us? And I want to tie this together to some of the other passages that we've looked at. The passage of the Gerasene demoniac who he lives in a graveyard. He's basically a walking dead man. He's totally cut off from his friends, from his family, from his community, and he's a danger even to himself. And we can tie this together also to the woman with the hemorrhage. Yesterday, I emphasized how her ritual impurity, not only the physical pain of the illness that she had, but the ritual impurity that came from her physical condition, those two things combined to also make her basically a walking corpse. Nobody wants to be near her. She has no resources. She's in constant pain, and she's cut off from her God and her community. She might as well be dead. And then today we see Jesus coming into a situation where somebody is actually literally dead. And he raises all three of these people in different ways to new life. So what does this mean for us, this journey that we've gone on over this weekend? I want to say three things. The first is that God comes into the world to save sinners. The second is that the power of the resurrection is pervasive in the Gospels. And the third is that God is calling us to put these two things into action in our own life. And we can experience the resurrection that all three of these people experience. So first, God comes into this world to save sinners. We say this in the prayer before communion. You have come into the world to save sinners, of whom I am the first. We're quoting the Apostle Paul there. We relate ourselves to God always as people who have no claim on him. You know, we relate ourselves to each other often, and often our life requires us to. We relate ourselves as people who have claims on each other. You know, let's say you get into a car accident. Well, you go to your insurance agent and you say, well, I have a claim to make. You owe me something. Even in our life at home, we often speak and live in terms of duty and obligation, the things that we owe each other. So a good husband owes his wife taking out the trash, working hard, helping her when she needs help. A good wife owes her husband all sorts of things like that. But when we relate to God, we relate to him as people that he owes nothing to. God, in a sense, owes us nothing. And yet, in his great love, in his great mercy, he comes into the world. This is why Christmas is so important, that we celebrate his coming into the world to a bunch of people that he owes nothing to, yet he loves more than the greatest human can love. So in all three Gospels, we've looked at people who are stuck. People who on their own circumstances, or I should say, according to their own circumstances, with their own resources, they cannot get out of their situation. They've run out of their own solutions. Their own resources have proved inadequate. The man with the demon is stuck living among the tombs. The woman with the hemorrhage has tried for 12 years every solution to be healed, and all it's done is waste her money and make her worse off. Jairus is at his wit's end. He has nowhere to turn other than Jesus. These are real people, but they're also images of the human condition, of the problem of sin and death, a problem that we all share, because we're all born into this world where often we sort of cope We can cope in a way that sort of keeps sin and death at arm's length, but we never can ultimately outrun them. None of us are immortal. Sooner or later, the consequence of sin is going to catch up to us. We're born into a fallen world, so we already have that against us. And then our own sins, our own, not ritual impurities, but our own moral impurities, our own decisions, like the Gerasene man with the legion, to worship things other than God, those things push God even farther from us. But in that situation, God intervenes, and he is always there, ready to heal us if we're willing to be healed. He comes to the man across the sea. Jesus actually gets into a boat to go in search of that man. Jesus is not in that crowd by accident. He knows that that woman is there, and he doesn't sort of store away the information that she's been healed. He makes it public. He interrupts his journey to Jairus' house so that this woman's healing can be a testament to those around her. God comes to save the people who know they need his salvation. People who know that without him, they're done for. People like Jairus, who know that without Jesus, they have no hope. So the next point is that the power of the resurrection is pervasive in the Gospels. So the man, where's the man living? He's in the tombs. Jesus comes to a man in the tombs to give him life, and in 3 weeks, we're going to celebrate Jesus coming out of the tomb to give us life. When Jesus says to the Gerasene demoniac at the end of the gospel, go and tell your family and friends what God has done for you, that's pointing towards what Jesus says to the myrrh-bearing women. Go and tell the apostles that I'm risen. Even Jairus' name means he will awaken. Is a signal to us of God's pervasive power to defeat death, to defeat sin. When Jesus takes only his 3 closest disciples, Peter, James, and John, to Jairus' house, that's a signal to us. Who goes with Jesus to Mount Tabor on August 6th to be transfigured? Peter, James, and John. They witness the power of his resurrection in that transfiguration. And who is with Jesus? Who's closest with Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane? Peter, James, and John. They see the connection between Jesus's cross and his resurrection. When Jesus says to the parents of the girl, give her something to eat, that's a reminder to us of what Jesus does himself when he rises from the dead to prove to his disciples that he is not a ghost. He says, give me something to eat. So the power of God's resurrection, the power of what Jesus has done by submitting to the cross for us, going to the tomb for us. A tomb is sort of the ultimate worst place to be. It's like being a dead body, cold and lifeless, in a cold and lifeless place. And that's where Jesus goes. And then rising from the dead, that pervasive power of the gospel is what constantly intervenes in our lives to overcome sin and death in our life. So what do we do about this? I said, the third point, how does Jesus' resurrection change me, a sinner? We have to admit that we're sinners. We have to be like Jairus and admit that we have no more resources to save ourselves. We have to be like the woman who spent all her money and it got her nowhere. And so in faith, reach out to touch Jesus and enter into relationship with him. We have to be aware of how much we're alienated from God and how much we need his love. So, brief plug here. Do an examination of conscience. Look into your life to see where you've been relying on your own resources instead of relying on God. Where in your own life have you worshiped things other than God rather than worshiping God? And then bring that to the sacrament of confession. I have 3 weeks before Easter. Make a good Easter confession and communion. Be like the woman when Jesus heals the woman. First, he heals her, and then oddly, he says after he heals her, be healed. The power comes out of him, and she feels the healing, and then he says, be healed. That's because our Christian life is constantly being renewed. We're constantly being healed. God is calling us to renewal on a daily basis, to look into our hearts on a daily basis and say, Lord, where you're not king, I want you to be king in my heart. So we have to deal with the fact that we're sinners, but then what do? Don't look at your own sin anymore. Once you've gone to confession, forget about your sin. Don't rely on your own resources or obsess about your sinfulness. Obsess about how you're cut off from God. The woman could have stayed in that situation forever, but instead she looks to Jesus. Jairus, instead of sitting in misery as his daughter dies, he looks to Jesus. Look not to your own resources, nor to your own sinfulness. Look to the resurrection. Look at what God has done and is continuing to do in your life to reconcile you with him, to make you a son or daughter of God. In both the woman with the hemorrhage is called daughter, and Jairus's daughter is a daughter of God. God doesn't just want to sort of cancel our sins. He actually wants to bring us into relationship with him. To him be glory, honor, and worship now and ever and unto the ages of ages. Amen.
Thank you again very much, Father Deacon Cyril. That was a wonderful third and final installment of our parish mission. While he is still here, does anyone now have any questions or comments for the weekend? Anything at all? We're discovering that they're all knowing here in
Cool.
That is okay. That is okay. So again, Father Deacon, thank you very, very much. Last 3 days have been wonderful. We've all actually this parish alone has had the most who listened to all 3 of your talks throughout this weekend. So we can surely say that this has been a very fruitful and a very educational weekend for all of us as we've heard you speak. We wish you all the very best in your studies. I was explaining to them earlier kind of where you're at and where you're going with that. So we wish you all the best with your studies and God's blessings upon you and your family, and hopefully you keep safe and healthy. And as well, as I mentioned in the other parishes, we hope that when borders loosen up, hopefully maybe this summer or something, we will be sure to invite Father Deacon and his family to the district so that he can actually see you all in person, and maybe we'll have him preach not a full mission, but maybe if you can do the homily that weekend or something. So
I'd love to come.
We look forward to seeing him in person, hopefully sooner than later. So,
Thank you so much.
all right, we will let you go and get back
Okay,
to your family, and hopefully we will see you soon. God bless.
thank you, and God bless you all.